Welcome everyone to the podcast of the Cleft Palate Craniofacial Journal. I'm Pat Chibbaro, your host and the multimedia specialist for the Cleft Palate Craniofacial Journal, and I'm really very honored to have the lead author and a couple of the participants of this really important study, this paper that as a professional, I think all of us should be reading. I think it really impacts the care that we can give to our patients along the journey, and definitely to understand what what the impact is for me personally as a clinical person. What's my impact on the journey of a woman with a cleft lip and palate as they look back as an adult. And so the paper, which is OnlineFirst, December 2nd, is What I Want You to Know, Adult Women's Stories of Cleft Lip and Palate. And the authors are Danielle McWilliams and Alan Hebben-Watie, and they are from Solomon's Institute for Applied Psychology, Canterbury Christchurch University, Kent in the UK. And I'm really honored to have Danielle Williams, the first author on this paper, here with me, as well as two of the participants in the study, Fiona, Hinde, and Briona Stauffer. I wanted to thank you all for joining me. So I want you to all unmute yourselves so we can all be jumping in and out of this conversation. So thank you, all of you, for joining me today. So really, really grateful to have you, especially since in the UK it's about 8 p.m. So thank you so much for that. So Danielle, I always like to start out by getting an understanding of what motivated you to and Alan to pursue this work.
Sure. And yeah, firstly, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here and great to kind of try and really expand the reach of this study, which became such a huge part of my life in so many ways. So I guess in terms of motivation, I can answer in a few different ways. So I think something I've learned throughout my work so far is that it's often comfortable and in some ways easier and manageable to assign research priorities that map onto what a particular service is able to provide or the scope of an intervention. So, for example, a cardiology paper will be, in its very nature, more medical. A depression study will use outcome measures that are gold standard for measuring depression. And even a kind of more person-centered inquiry might think about individual characteristics, but less about commonalities between communities. A Cleft paper may look at medical techniques, it might look at mental health, or it might look at more person-centered narratives, but it's also becoming more diverse in terms of age ranges. We've got a long way to go. I think a lot of research is still kind of focused on that early period, and that's really important. But as you really nicely said in that introduction there, we need to be thinking about adults because we don't disappear, right? And I've yet to see work that truly considers intersectionality. And I guess we might come on to that a little bit in a moment. But I think I just wanted to really get across that a woman with a cleft is both a woman and a person with a cleft. And we know that different identities afford people different levels of advantage or disadvantage in society. And there is some evidence that there are gender differences between the experiences of men and women with a cleft, but no one, to my knowledge, there's not been any qualitative kind of rich data collected on those nuances. So I really thought those stories were worth hearing. I think also I am a woman born with a cleft, and that was disclosed from the very beginning of this project. That part of my identity brings forth my own story, my own narrative, which I chose to harness during the thinking stage of the research. I've had the privilege of being in communities my whole life, within cleft communities as well as professional communities, and I've seen sub-communities form, women with cleft, mums with cleft, men with cleft, and older adults that are campaigning for better care. Like, there are unique stories, and I think we need to be hearing them more.
So maybe you could give us, it was really quite a paper to read in terms of the depth of the stories that you were able to get from your participants. And maybe you can explain, if you could explain the methods, because I thought it was so interesting that it was just not a narrative, but you combined it um, with the photos. Maybe you can explain what you did.
Sure. I mean, I would also defer to Fiona and Briona here because I'd love to hear about how it was experienced. But I think
Absolutely.
in short, I first of all kind of met with each individual participant that was interested. I was really keen that this sort of human aspect came first. So I met with them first to get to kind of meet and get to know each other. And then I asked each person to go away, have a couple of weeks and collate some photographs. And I specifically said, I don't need to see photographs of your face or your scars. I want to see photos of your life and how, if you were telling your story in pictures, how would you tell it? And also, similar to what you said at the start there, I kind of highlighted to people, if you were to show your childhood surgeon about your life now, what would you want them to know? Like, what stories would you want them to hear in order to help them better understand your life and the challenges and the celebrations and everything else? So I was very clear that I didn't want a particular angle. People ask me, why don't you look at coping mechanisms in women with Cleft? Why don't you look at treatment satisfaction? And I really tried to hold that boundary that I wasn't going to do that because I wanted to hear whatever people wanted to bring. Um, and then I guess the second part, which is what you originally asked me about, sorry, was the kind of narrative side. So one of the kind of challenging and surprising in all the best ways part of this project was that I conducted 14 interviews based on these photographs that these 14 women brought to me. And the questions were very open-ended. Tell me about this photo. What's happening here? Why would you want to share this? What were you thinking when you took this photo? And then whatever came out of that discussion came out. And the output was of 14 interviews was over 800 pages of really rich, really powerful stories. Nothing was irrelevant. Um, and it was my task to bring them together into common discourses whilst retaining the nuances of the individual stories. So you'll see in the paper, there's a table where everyone has a sort of synopsis of their story, almost like the headlines. And then I kind of brought together 6 intersecting discourses of enduring, hiding, striving, healing, reclaiming, and reconciling. And I've told each of those stories as best I can with the limited space that I had, hopefully in ways that show that there's not a sort of single trajectory. They're all intersecting all the time. And for a lot of people, that's the living reality. But yeah, I'm really keen to kind of hear, I guess, what it was like to take part if I could hand over.
It's as you're talking, I have the paper and I just want to, for anyone who's got it on the video, these photos, it's so interesting, the types of photos, and this is why one of the reasons you must read this paper. The photos, that were chosen and the stories behind them, it was just really amazing that by letting them have a narrative and choosing their own photos to tell their story, it seemed that you achieved you really were able to come up with all of the different themes that people were telling you, oh, you should try to look at this, try to study this. That all seemed to me to come out organically through them being allowed. And I'm seeing you, Fiona, I'm seeing you, I feel like you're connecting to that. So I want you to jump in. But it seemed that by letting people just tell their story, it brought out all of the themes that have been identified as being issues for adults and for people that go through the journey of living with a cleft, that it doesn't end when you're 20 years old. So I'd love to have Fiona and Briona step in. Fiona, let me have you first, because I felt like you were really connecting with what I was saying, or maybe let me hear what you have to say about this. I'd love to have you join.
Yeah, what you were saying was really accurate. Having your own narrative and your own voice, when having your voice heard, when you have a speech difference, it comes on many levels, doesn't it? So we've got, you know, our physical difficulties, if you like, with speech, and then the whole parcel that comes with having a cleft and having surgery and all of the things that we've all been through. And they're very much done to rather than with. Their experience as being, you know, not necessarily in control. So having a voice and having control through the openness of the conversation and the photos, that has made that connection just incredible to be a part of.
And let me jump over then to Briona. So Briona is on. Briona and I are on one side of the pond, and Fiona and Danielle are on the other side. I love this. Briona, just jump in on you know how this experience was for you.
Yeah, I loved the structure of the study because, again, I kind of, as they were saying, we had those photos as guiding posts to really structure the conversation around. But Danielle did a fantastic job of not shoehorning the conversation. So I feel like when I talk to not just medical providers, but anyone really about my cleft lip and palate, they bring in their own preconceived notions, and I can end up kind of just going along with whatever they already think my experience was or what they might think was most challenging. And like for myself, I included a picture of me drinking a milkshake for the first time through a straw, because you might not think that about it if you don't have cleft, but my whole life experience until I was 19 was that anytime I got milkshakes, I had to ask for a spoon. And, you know, it's just another little othering to your day-to-day life. And so then suddenly I could drink a milkshake with everybody else through a straw, and that was fantastic. It's just achieving little bits of normalcy.
Right.
And like you said, I wouldn't have talked about that if I had a researcher who already had the preconceived notion of what everyone's going to want to talk about is, for example, like the way you look. I even learned things that I didn't know about from her study, which I've never heard of an obturator, which is that orthodontic device. I knew nothing about that, and I have cleft. And so I love the way she went about it.
I will tell you, you know, just from the clinical side of it, you know, reading your narratives, I just learned, you know, I feel like, you know, and I, as I said, I had been the nurse practitioner on the cleft and craniofacial team for over 30 years. And so I just felt that I constantly learned. And now that I am working part-time with a craniofacial support group called My Face, working with 4 individuals on the staff who have lived experience with cleft and craniofacial conditions, so much of what I've read from yours and all of the other participants were so, you know, many of the same things were echoed, you know, by them. And, you know, one of the things that seemed to be a theme throughout here, throughout the narratives, was the challenges of being an adult who have aged out of cleft care and just having to fight, you know, and definitely in the US, with dental care was such a big theme, both in terms of the challenges of obtaining it, feeling that you have to justify it, the cost of it, which is like a whole other conversation that's being fought all over the world, and definitely in the great US of A, we have horrible dental coverage and horrible dental issues in terms of getting support for that. But also, what really did strike me, and I think it's a real wake-up call for us on clinical teams, is understanding what the dental journey is from a psychological point of view, from a pain point of view. It really hit me hard, and very, very closely with the dental and orthodontic team, but I didn't experience it myself as a patient, and so I just find so much of what was said here is so important for us as a clinical team to take in and integrate into our care. So I wanted to thank you for for really sharing some very difficult things that we need to hear. We need to hear. And so Danielle, I wonder from and your process was that you listened to them and reread them multiple times. Maybe you can describe what your process was, because it was really quite intense.
Cool. So you mean like process of doing the interviews and then drawing out the narratives? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, you well, it looks like what you did then was they were read, they were reread, and you pulled out themes. It just seemed, how long did this take? This seems like it was a very intense process.
Yeah, so every interview was, I think the average length was about 94 minutes. I'm fairly sure my longest interview was like well over 2 hours. And that, again, that's not something that I regulated in any way. Just like I didn't regulate the number of photos that people were allowed, quote unquote, to submit. So yeah, people really kind of came as they were, and I came as I was, and that was kind of the beauty of it. So yeah, the interview on a practical level, the interviews were roughly an hour and a half long. I cannot tell you the number of times I listened to each one. I listened to them in the car, I listened to them in bed, I listened to them while I was cooking, I listened to them while I was working.
I think you must have been in your dream.
Yeah, I think in terms of, genuinely, and in terms of advice to other researchers, I'd say get used to the sound of your own voice. It's a good way to overcome any of those insecurities.
Interesting.
So and
Danielle, let me just ask Briona and Fiona, what was it like for you when Danielle asked you to choose photos? I was thinking, like, what would I, just thinking about my own life journey, like what would I have picked out, just in terms of any of, the part of my journey that might have been difficult, or, I mean, I wasn't born with any medical problems, but I certainly had my own life challenges. And I wonder, how did you go about, Briona, how did you go about this photo process? How was that for you?
Yeah, I honestly opened my photo app, scrolled all the way back to the first photo on there, and went through all of them and just thought about like the memories associated with them and what emotions they made me feel. Because some things, like we've talked about, I have plenty of pictures of me when I had jaw surgery that look horrendous. But like, you already know about that. You already know that if you're going to have jaw surgery, it's going to be painful and a long recovery. And so I was looking at, like I mentioned, the, first time I was able to drink a milkshake, or like I included a picture of the hospital waiting room, just things that for me, I could still feel viscerally and felt like were worth sharing, because it might be something others might not be as familiar with.
Yeah, I think there was a mentioning, and I'm not sure where exactly in the paper, Danielle, but the idea of, and maybe it was one of the people that were being interviewed, was about, us understanding that it's not over. I love when you say it's not sorted. You're not, just because you've gotten out of treatment, you're done. It's not, life isn't, it's not perfect and all sorted. There were just so many, great nuggets of information, and just, so much that came from allowing these women to, tell their own story and not sort of be pigeonholed into answering specific types of questions. I thought that was brilliant. Fiona, what was your photo journey experience like?
It made me consider the identity as a woman with a cleft, rather than you know, the many other aspects of our identity that we have. And I don't think I've spent an awful lot of time reflecting on my identity as a woman with a cleft, because, you know, life's too busy and, you know, denial's a great thing. So it made me have a good look and what choices I'd made in the light of my response, I suppose, to you know, in there there's parts about my chosen form of expression as being music, which is expressive and communicative, but not voice. So it was things like that that made me see, it made sense. It's quite validating in the way that Danielle wrote it up as well, that I saw running themes through my own world, drew them out, brought them along to the conversation with Danielle, and then what felt so validating was that she came back with these themes that run across so many of our participants. Some of us have met, some of us have not. And during the study, none of us, even who knew one another, didn't know that other people were participating in the interviews. So I kind of did it from a different direction where it made me reflect, and then I, you know, chose photos to express that.
Right. Danielle, I wonder if you might want to talk about anything in the paper that you think really stood out for you, or that you think is really important for those on clinical teams reading this to absorb and to, you know, to integrate into their work.
Sure. I think firstly, it's such a privilege to hear what Briona and Fiona have just said. So I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that. And it's I think in terms of directions for future research, and what I'm very proud of about this study was that throughout every stage of the process, I tried to have an awareness of my own power in terms of my position as a researcher. So, like, I mean, hopefully these guys can back me up. And at every stage, people chose their own pseudonyms. People, you know, were able to respond when I put summaries together. Those individual synopses, they were read and approved, and your comments were made and things were revised by every single one of the participants. So, and that meant a lot to me that kind of was able to happen. And I think really we should be aiming to mirror that in our clinical work, in our research work. Like, it is a collaboration. You know, these people are adults with their own lives. They don't disappear when they leave the clinic room and reappear 5 years later when you see them again. I think something that really came through to me, which I was hoping would come through, but obviously I, you know, because of the very open stance I was taking, there was every risk that it wouldn't, was the true kind of intersection with the female identity. So I had people come to me, and, you know, as Briona said, you talk about milkshake, but I also have people come to me and talk about their piercings and their makeup and their, you know, experiences of dating, and how that, you know, is fundamentally probably very different to, you know, men's experiences of dating. And I'm not saying that they're better or worse, but they are different. And I think our clinicians should be aware of that. You know, they're not exempt from that part of our lives. And I think something that one of the discourses that I really love, I don't have favorites, you know, they all kind of run through every story, and it makes it incredible. But one of the ones that I really love is the reclaiming. And there were so many kind of small acts of resistance that I just, you know, resistance against the oppression, resistance against the stereotypes, resistance against the, oh no, you'll never be able to do that. that I just thought were fantastic. From people, one lady told me that her orthodontist had told her, "Oh, you can't wash your obturator with toothpaste, you have to use washing up liquid, fairy liquid." And she said, "Well, I'm not going to have fairy liquid in my bathroom." So she devised this whole system where it looked like it fitted with the colour scheme of her bathroom. And I had, someone speak about piercings and how that was a way of reclaiming this part of the sort of head part of their body, because so many times other people had cut into it and had access to it, and now she's managing by kind of taking back that, reclaiming that power. And I again, I want to emphasize that I don't think these are necessarily worse experiences than what people with other gender identities might report, but I don't think we can shy away from the fact that they're different.
Absolutely. So I wonder what, Danielle, from here, what are you planning to do with in the future with this information? Are you building on it? What can we see down the line from you?
Sure. I mean, my kind of immediate plans, I guess, I would like to make the images and the associated stories more public. Like, I would like to create an online resource where it's almost like a gallery. People can, whether they're professionals or other adults, other parents, anyone with with an interest can come and see. And my hope would be that people can maybe learn from it, take it into their practice, but also have that kind of, especially for the Cleft community, have that assurance that they're not on their own with this. The number of times women in their interviews would say, "Oh, this is going to sound crazy. I bet you've never heard this before." And I'm thinking to myself, "Well, I've heard it 13 other times, and you need to know this." And obviously there were individual, every story was different, but there were experiences that really united people.
Absolutely.
And I don't think I should be the only one that has that privilege to have to know that.
Couldn't agree with you more. So let me ask you, Briona and Fiona. So you have the clinical world, all the teams that read this journal from all different specialties. What would you like to say to them after, now that you've reflected on your own experience? What can you say to us that could help us improve our practice?
Fiona, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
You go ahead.
Alrighty. So there are a few things. Like Danielle said, we become adults. We don't just stay children forever. We don't disappear when we turn 18. And where I run into that a lot is when I go to the doctor, or if I go to the dentist especially, they'll read that I have cleft lip and palate, or I'll mention it, and almost always the response I get is, "Oh yeah, you had a surgery when you were a baby, and that was all right." And then I have to explain that no, I had my last surgery when I was 19. I've had so many procedures and orthodontics, and I have medical trauma from that. Like, the smell of an alcohol swab for the longest time was like enough to give me a panic attack, because I associated it with IVs and sedation and very painful things. I work in the medical field now, so I've gotten some desensitization, but with that intersectionality approach, understanding that like this person that you think just has cleft might, because of cleft or because of other reasons, have all of these other things going on,
Right.
that you might need to be careful with. And then the other thing that I'm sure most people with cleft have experienced is feeling like almost somebody's craft project. Like I brought up in the interview that I had jaw surgery, and at the same time they did a wisdom teeth removal and a nose revision. And during all of my pre-op appointments, it was brought up multiple times. "Are you sure you don't want to do another lip revision? Are you sure?" And I understand from like a healthcare provider perspective, you're worried about my insurance ending, you're worried about doing all of this at once. But all I hear as, again, a woman is you think that I don't look the way I should. You think what you've done is unsatisfactory, especially because my surgeon took pictures before and after every operation I had since I was born. So all I'm thinking is you're unhappy with your before and after. And does that mean that I should be unhappy too? So really,
oh my gosh, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking I had those very conversations with patients, and my motivation, I will tell you, never was, I really, I think we could improve on you, or, it was always, okay, what, I always thought about insurance, especially when kids were starting to age out of their parents. So, but, and I thought I was really good at being sensitive to the message I was sending, but no matter what, we just have to keep being aware of these things. You're so right.
Yeah. And I honestly think telling someone your motivation, again, especially at the age I was 19, and I can understand, even if I don't know the ins and outs, I can understand you might be pushing for something because I'm about to drop off of my insurance.
Right.
And so talking about, like, I just want to make sure that this is what you want because X, Y, Z. Exactly. I only want to go in there once, or I'm worried about your insurance, instead of just leaving it as an open-ended question, because that just lets the person come to unsavory conclusions.
Exactly. Got it. Fiona, your thoughts?
Mine is more about moving away from the vocabulary or the approach that it's about deficit and deficiency and difficulty, all these, D words, that, in play, we're all broken. We all need to be fixed. We all need to be better. Like, not being good enough. It's that sense. It's very similar to what Briona's just said, really, isn't it? That we receive comments very easily as being, you're not good enough, you're not right, you're not, there's, a deficit impairment going on. And again, I've ended up with PTSD from medical trauma as well. And I think there are many, many of us in this situation. By the time you've had the number of procedures and the number of consultations that we have had, there are too many to count, and we are traumatized. Smells, lights, everything will cause a reaction for me now. It's quite an effort to get through the door, and I think that needs to be understood. That if I'm through your door, I want to be there, bear with me.
So much to think about, and to, for us as the clinicians to reflect on. So Danielle, and we have our last few minutes, any last thoughts about your paper, or just about your own personal thoughts about this whole process?
Sure. I think a lot of what we've been talking about is about power, right? It's about people being aware of the power they hold, what they're representing, even if they don't intend to be. The minute you put on that coat or that badge, you are, you're representing something. And when someone has trauma, and even if they don't, the world is obsessed with women's appearance and women's behavior, whatever that means. And just because you're a researcher, people are, you're not neutral in that. You're not exempt from people kind of making assumptions about what you might be meaning to say or meaning to do. So I think, being aware of our power is really important, in terms of encouraging come forward that may otherwise. In terms of summing up, I just want to say thank you to you, to the CPCJ, but also obviously to Fiona, to the other 12 women that were involved. It's been incredible.
I am so grateful for this paper, and let me just reintroduce it to everyone. It's What I Want You to Know: Adult Women's Stories of Cleft Lip and or Palate. and you will see it online first on the Cleft Palate Craniofacial Journal site, posted on December 2nd. The authors are Danielle McWilliams and Alan Hebben-Wadley from Solomon's Institute for Applied Psychology, Canterbury Christ Church University, Kent, UK. Hope I can come visit you there someday, Danielle, when I come to visit my daughter. I would love to meet you and continue this conversation. But I feel like this is a real gift from our, from women who really have honestly shared their journey. And for me personally, I think as a clinician, this is just such an important paper for any of us caring for these patients to read and incorporate into their care. So I want to thank Danielle and also Briona Stauffer and Fiona Hinde for participating and sharing your journey. Just really has made a difference for me, and I know it will for lots of my colleagues. So thank you so much for doing this. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.